Let's talk to Sir Alex Salmond. I call him that, even though he doesn't have a knighthood yet, but he might do. Defections to the Alpha Party this week, because, of course, lots and lots of people have decided that maybe the SNP are on their last legs. Following the former SNP leadership contender, Ash Regan. She's the next one who also jumped ship this weekend. I'm joined now by former First Minister of Scotland, Alex Salmond. You'd have to say, Alex, it's been a pretty good week for the Alpha Party, hasn't it?
Well, about a 50% increase in our parliamentary representation, Mike, from 2 to 3. But of course, what's important about this week with Ash Regan and councillors joining us is that Alba now have representation at every layer of government, council level and Scottish Parliament level, which obviously is crucial for Alba in Ash Regan, and also at parliamentary level Westminster with Kenny McCaskill and Neil Hanvey. So that's a big step forward for Alba. We couldn't have asked for better from our conference in Glasgow last weekend.
Right. I mean, there would be those who might say that you're sort of kicking against an open door at the moment because the SNP, a little bit like the Metropolitan Police, don't seem to be able to get much right these days.
Well, I mean, obviously parties try and do what you think is right. You try and get your case across and you hope that your opponents will give you a helping hand. And certainly the SNP are doing that at the present moment. But then, the Labour Party are no great shakes either, Mike. I mean, if you look at Labour and the SNP at the present moment, they're playing past the parcel. They seem determined to hand the election to each other, as you win the election. No, I don't want to win it. You win it instead. I mean, it's quite extraordinary what's going on. That does create a fairly unprecedented opening for a small party like Alba to drive forward and become very relevant and very potent and credible in the election next year.
Well, it's an interesting thing you say, because we'll get on to the SNP's rent control problems in a moment in Edinburgh, but let's talk as well about the announcements from both Humza Yousaf and Anas Sarwar calling for a ceasefire in Gaza, which is contrary to what Keir Starmer says in the Labour Party in London and contrary to what the UK government says in Downing Street as well, and indeed contrary to what the US policy would be. Are you in the ceasefire camp, or have you got a different view?
Well, I was first in the ceasefire camp on your programme, if I remember, Mike. And my attitude to this is quite clear. I've never had any doubt that Hamas are a terrorist organisation. They're a cutthroat bunch of thugs who cannot be left in control of Gaza. But I think that when people are terrorists, they should be treated as such, and they should be criminals and brought to book. And the international community should facilitate that process. They shouldn't be treated like they're a government, and certainly I don't think invasion is the right way to treat it, because you're basically saying, look, Hamas are the government of Gaza and we're going to invade Gaza as a country. Far, far better to criminalise the Hamas leadership, bring them to international justice, and not try to treat them as if they were some bona fide government. They're not. I mean, they haven't. I mean, the truth about Hamas is they got into power about 15, 20 years ago, and have never had an election since in Gaza. They're not a legitimate government, shouldn't be treated as such. So I do believe in a ceasefire, because I don't think you end suffering and wars by escalation. I think you do it by de-escalation. And I think that a ceasefire is a proper thing to speak for. I mean, it's becoming very much a political issue in the UK. I regret that, actually, because it's almost as if, the Tories are positioning to expose Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer's trying to stay close to the Tory government position so as he doesn't get labelled as an anti-Semite. And the Labour Party are in fairly open rebellion about Keir Starmer's position. I mean, it's not just Anas Sarwar in Scotland. I mean, I see there's two leaders of administrations in England are now calling for the Labour leader's resignation. Yes. So it would be a great pity if something as important as the situation in the Middle East becomes part of the mix of the bandage of UK politics. And the other thing, then this is probably the most important thing. I don't see, Mike, I don't see any end game being put forward. And I'm not claiming that I've got the solutions, but what troubles me is that no one seems to be coming forward with what's going to happen in Gaza after the Israeli Defense Force wipes out Hamas. Are they going to continue
Well,
in
I
occupation? Are they
think
going
that
to
is.
hand it back to people in Palestine? What's going to happen?
Well, I think that's the point. I think nothing can happen until Hamas has been wiped out, because at the end of the day, you cannot have a ceasefire while they're still holding hostages. You cannot
Well,
negotiate,
and I
but you
agree.
cannot. Hang on,
You
you
know,
can't negotiate a peaceful agreement with a bunch of terrorists, as you say, who are actually criminal. And you can't surely sit there in Tel Aviv waiting for the next rocket to hit, hoping that somebody from The Hague will make a phone call to some telephone line in the underground tunnel network of Gaza and say, "Would you mind coming to The Hague where you can stand trial?" Because that's unrealistic, isn't it?
Well, I mean, lots of things are unrealistic, Mike, but I sometimes think in international situations, you have to get your end game of where you're trying to get to first, if you see the processes to get there. And, you know, the problem with, well, there are many problems with the current tragedy, but, you know, if thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of people end up dead in Gaza at the end of this, will that not create a situation where there's a new generation of terrorism springs forth? You get into an endless cycle of terrorism. And, you know, if, for example, this is just one idea, I'm not claiming it's a simple idea or the right idea, but let's say you put forward or postulated under the United Nations auspices that Gaza should be run by a combination as a protectorate of Sunni states until such time as the Palestinians are able freely and properly to vote in elections. Now, I mean, there's all sorts of difficulties attached to that, but at least it would be an end game to which people were working, as opposed to now, where we're in an escalating conflict. But nobody seems to be coming forward with ideas in the end game. And the UK politicians, if I may say so, are spending a lot more time in their positioning or where they are in domestic politics. And I really do think we should get away from that and on to trying to offer a constructive solution as to how you can de-escalate and find a way forward.
Yeah. Well, I'm one of those that thinks you can only de-escalate it by not having Hamas in the picture, but that's another story. Let's talk about what's happening in your neck of the woods. The SNP's policy on rent control seems to have gone through the roof somehow, or through the floor. What's happened?
Well, I mean, you know, this one of these things that, you know, people think, oh my goodness, there's lots of these temporary lets in Edinburgh. Let's, you know, stomp down on them and that will solve the problem. It doesn't solve the problem. You just transfer the problem on, and Edinburgh's now declared a housing crisis. I mean, there is only one answer to a housing crisis and a shortage of housing, and that's not to have legislation registering and bringing tens of thousands of people under some sort of bureaucratic system. The only way to stop a housing crisis is to build more houses. It's as simple as that. You cannot prevent a housing crisis in any other way except building more houses. And I think more time should be invested in mobilising the capital to get more houses built, and less time occupying yourselves on how you administer the scarcity and the shortage of houses that there already are.
Yes.
So I think that'd be a much more sensible way forward. But, you know, obviously, in not just Scotland, but England, the idea of solving a housing crisis by building more houses seems to be unfashionable these days. Well, you know, I think it should be brought back into fashion as quick as possible.
Well, the problem seems to be in England, I don't know if it's the same in Scotland, is that the government seems to think there's only one group of people that can build houses, and that is the housing development companies. Whereas surely what they ought to be doing is looking a bit more laterally, and if the people who supposedly build the houses are dictating the terms, they need to change the people who are building the houses, don't they?
Well, one thing that's happened is, you know, local authorities have abdicated, in most cases, responsibility for building houses. They've given it to housing associations. The trouble is that many of these housing associations, take the biggest one in Scotland, that have been examining its actions in an area of Glasgow and Maryhill called the Wynford Estate. And I'm finding it very difficult to understand why the Wheatley Group, which was the old Glasgow Housing Association, the biggest social landlord in Scotland, thinks it's a tremendous idea to spend 70, 80 million pounds removing 600 houses by demolishing them to build 300, some of which are going to be private houses. You know, again, call me old-fashioned, but the Wheatley Group's named after John Wheatley, the pioneering housing Labour politician of the 1920s. John Wheatley, if he was still alive today, he wouldn't be demolishing 600 houses and building 300. He'd be demolishing 300 and building 600. So this abdication of responsibility to housing associations, who are behaving ever more like corporate landlords, is one of the difficulties that's clogging up the supply of socially rented houses, certainly in Scotland, and I'd be surprised if it wasn't the same as happening in many areas of England.
Yeah. Maybe someone needs to give Mr. Humza Yousaf an abacus where he can add up between what's the difference between 300 and 600, whether one's better than the other. Now, we've got to run, Alex, but enough time for you quickly to give a plug to your stage show. The Eyes Have It, fresh from the Edinburgh Festival, now appearing on the London stage, no less, the Leicester Square Theatre later this month.
Well, this is the big showdown. This is the Brexit showdown. You're over modest, of course, because you're in the side of the Brexiteer brigands.
Yes.
That's yourself, David.
I see you put me on the far right
Fox.
on the poster as well, which is a bit unfortunate.
Yeah, you're the far right in the poster, just where you belong. Whereas I'm on the side of the polite folk, like Andrew Marr of LBC, and Gina Miller is on my side. And we're not just saying
the
Brexit's
losing side.
disaster.
I think that's what you call that, isn't it?
Everybody in their anti, even Nigel Farage knows that Brexit's a disaster. We're saying it's time to reverse it. So that's what's going to be the nub of the debate.
Yeah.
None of this lily-livered, Keir Starmer, Liberal Democrat nonsense, there's nothing can be done. We're saying reverse it. It's time to change course. So it's going to be a rocking debate. It's in the Leicester Square Theatre, the 21st of November, no holds barred.
Yeah. I take it you'll take the pound sterling as paying for tickets. You're not going to take euros or anything.
As a special exemption for this performance only, the English pounds will, mind you, once Andrew Bailey, the Governor of the Bank of England's finished, the guy without an economics degree, who had another disastrous performance yesterday, either the pound won't be worth anything or none of us will have any. He won't be satisfied till everybody's ground into
the dust. Exactly right. Alex, good to
ground into the dust, that man, Andrew Bailey. But nonetheless, for a special day, we'll accept the pound sterling. It's going to be a great debate. Listen, there'll be plenty of raucous interchange, but there'll also be an underlying good nature and good fun attached to it, because one of the things, as you know, Mike, from your experience in Edinburgh, we're trying to demonstrate you can debate serious issues in an intense way, but you can also, after the debate's over, go for a drink together, because you must be able to debate out with the silos of opposing camps.
Absolutely right. Alex, good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Alex Salmond, former First Minister of Scotland.